Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Rush deep dive on 1985's Power Windows. I like to think that this is my favorite Rush album. If I'm ever asked, this is what I say. So I'm really excited for this one. But first and foremost, as we always do, I'm going to read from Hugh Syme's Art of Rush. Neil Peart remembers getting chills when Hugh Syme described the visual concept for Power Windows over the phone. You too may feel a tingle at the nape of your neck when you gaze at the finished artwork. Let's set the scene. It's an unearthly hour of night. A boy clothed in pajama pants sits inside a room that, apart from a wooden chair and three television sets, is entirely empty. Outside, a full moon makes the room's window glow like a cathode ray tube. The boy points a remote control at the window, which is partially open, but now he's turned his head to look at you, suddenly aware that he's being observed. He doesn't seem as surprised as one might expect. There's an eerie calm in his demeanor. His face, waxing crescent in the moonlight, initially appears to be that of a boy who has recently crossed over into adolescence. There's no guile there, but peer closer into the numeral shade, his features reveal that he's not only slightly older than he initially seemed, but there's also a potentially dangerous psychosis lurking beneath his placid expression. There's a crazy guy sitting in a room thinking he can control the world with a remote, and he's doing it. That's the part I love, says Neil. The boy on the album cover is inspired by Billy Bibbit, the stammering mental patient in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In the movie version, Brad Dourif portrayed Bibbit with mushroom hair, manic eyes, and a tongue that struggled to engage the clutch. Hugh recruited a junior stockbroker in Toronto to pose for a photograph for his painting reference. Photographer Demo Safari helped Hugh create a tableau for a photograph with the male model. The window and room actually existed, says Hugh. Demo and I worked on lighting the model to create the moonlight coming from outside the window. At one point, though, he went off the grid. Notice that boy's right hand, extended towards his knee, is out of proportion to the rest of his body. Rembrandt used a similar compositional device in the anatomy lessons of Dr. Nicholas Tulp, making the hand of the corpse in his painting disproportionately large. It's a subtle detail in each painting, but the effect is the same. It is subliminally unsettling to the viewer. The boy's hand also seems uncharacteristically strong and taut for such a skinny body, which adds tension to the scene. Hugh also used the visual device of outsized hands on the back cover for an image of the shirtless boy using an enormous pair of binoculars. The ocular tool in the boy's hands represents another pun on the title of Power Windows. There's a Canadian painter named Alex Colville that I really admire, says Neil. He had done a painting of a woman on a ferry boat with binoculars just like that. So as a secondary shot, I suggested that as an homage to Alex Colville. The task was infinitely more demanding than he anticipated. Just when Hugh thought he was close to completing the marathon, Power Windows reference, he had to sprint an extra mile. Turns out Geddy Lee wasn't entirely satisfied with the direction of the album's front cover. To Hugh's horror, the bass player suggested that he add vintage televisions to the painting. The painting was close to done without them. My view was that it was an empty room and it had to be bleak. The suggestion was not quite early enough for it to feel comfortable for me to go back. It's probably the only time when Geddy and I argued. Not to the point where Geddy said, "Who signs your checks?" It wasn't quite like that, Hugh laughs, but that was our first moment of artistic tension. I said, "Come on, just trust me." In the end, Geddy's view prevailed. We found a good balance in the end, says Geddy. Hugh concurs, he was right. When I look at this now, there's something about the TVs that just works. There's something mysterious about the boy collecting these dormant televisions. Hugh continued the television theme in the Rush logo, which resembles the static of a vintage set. But there was one final revision to be made. In the cover image, a faint ghost image of the binocular boy painting lingers behind the glass of the main television screen. That detail is not in the original painting. We added this into the cover at the final printing stage. I created line art of the boy using a horizontal fine line screen to emulate the look of television transmissions from that era when the Philco Predicta console TV was in vogue, says Hugh. When I had the idea for Prime Mover, I was still so taken with the idea of this guy sitting at the window and working the world, says Neil. That's exactly what I was thinking during the middle eight of Prime Mover. That's me taking the art and putting the words to it. It's funny, the weatherman in Quebec at the time was from Burlington, Vermont. I would watch the weather every day to see how the snow was going to be. When he showed what would have been in those days a simulated map, he showed the overview of Vermont and Quebec and he'd say, and now I'll set the clouds in motion. That part came exactly from that guy's weather report. Given that several songs on Power Windows explore different types of power, monetary, nuclear, sociopolitical, the artwork is fittingly potent. Decades later, the album art still thrums with its original vitality. I thought this was a really cool change for Hugh, says Alex Lyson. That's the thing with Hugh. Every cover that comes along, you step back and think, wow, I wasn't expecting this. In the mid 80s, we were developing the keyboard end of our songs. There was a bright freshness to the way we were writing, and it seemed we'd reach a new level. I think the artwork reflected that. So that was a lot, but what do we think?
Something I never noticed before. It's interesting, and I know what he's talking about, but the old liney uh, visuals on the old television sets. And it's funny because on the cassette version, you can't really see the binoculars in that TV. It's so small. But I also thought, and so it's not only in the logo, in the band name where it's the lines, it's on the back cover too. Doesn't show up very well, but yeah, but I
Oh,
was
it's
thinking,
actually like, yeah, it's on this.
I was wondering if
Mm-hmm.
that was meant to. Before you said about the static on the old televisions, I was thinking window blinds.
Yeah, interesting thought. I didn't know that his hand was disproportionately large.
Now it's
Un-
all I can see.
yeah, I
Right.
know. Right. It's so odd. And the other thing that I thought was cool that I could have left out in reading, but I thought it was so interesting was the fact that Prime Mover kind of came from this
That's
graphic. How
yeah,
interesting!
that's really
Now
cool.
it all makes sense, right? It's like,
Yeah,
See,
anyways.
I was thinking about the power of television, okay?
yeah.
Because growing up, all right, and I teach media criticism and media analysis. There used to be a very famous book called Tube of Plenty. It was written by Eric Barnow, who was a media critic. And it had that really old fashioned looking tube television on the cover. And I was thinking about Newton B. Minnow's critique, and he's still alive, by the way. Guy's in his 90s. The guy who called television a vast wasteland, this kind of thing. Um, in the 70s and 80s, there started to be all these critiques about what power did television have on people? How influential was it? Was it like, programming your kids and stuff like this? I mean, people had been huffing and puffing about this since the 50s, as they do with any new technology. But there started to be research about what effect it was having for people to watch endlessly and this and that. And when I saw that cover, I was really wondering about, like, here's the boy. He's alone in a room. There's not a whole lot except a bunch of like old televisions. And how much did he learn? How much was he programmed by the programs? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Totally, totally.
And you really do need to look at the vinyl. Like you need this big size because
Yeah,
there's cracks in the wall. There's an old plug-in. Like there's so much detail that just gets missed in the smaller formats.
for sure.
Yeah, it's really
And
it's
it
really
really
it's
goes
really
along with Neil's analysis of technology and of the various things in our lives that we take for granted that affect us. This would really fit in with that. And he and Hugh worked very closely together, throwing ideas back and forth to each other. I know this for a fact. And it would not surprise me if this were something that Neil was concerned about, because one of the joking names for television was the boob tube, like it supposedly made you stupid. people later would accuse the internet of the same thing. Like, mindless diversion. How much can you play Angry Birds? How much can you spend time on TikTok? This kind of thing. People would denigrate it. Well, they did that same thing with television. And I'm really wondering if television was kind of a window into our soul, a window into our thoughts, and if the only way to escape was to open a window and, allow a little light in, like get out in the outside world, which people were not doing. That was another big critique, like everybody's just sitting in front of the TV all the time. So I'm really wondering if there's a lot more critique going on there than meets the eye.
The last thing I want to say before we talk about the music is the guy in the cover. His name is also Neil. He owns a record shop in Toronto. I can't remember the name of it now. It's eluding me, but definitely check that out. He's still in the music business. And I thought it was fitting to use shout out Rush Backstage, my Power Windows mug for this episode. So let's get to it. Ralph, Grand Designs.
Let's get to it. This is Grand Designs.
All right, Grand Designs. It's one of two songs that don't have the letter M from this album. So that was makes it stand out. The title is derived from the novel of John Dos Passos, The Grand Design, written in 1949. Dos Passos also wrote The Big Money, and he also inspired the Camera Eye title. I haven't read the book. I did order it, but it didn't come in time. But I read a description that John Dos Passos' literary response to Frank FDR's New Deal, The Grand Design critiques the gargantuan growth of bureaucracy in Washington during the Great Depression and World War II. The satirical novel conveys the author's frustration with federal overreach and the hollow rhetoric that it sells to its people. So I think the basic theme of Grand Designs is that hollowness and the art and integrity versus the business side, kind of the conflict that they follow. So starting off in the first verse, so much style without substance, so much stuff without style. Now, it was 1985. It makes me think of hair pop bands of that time, though I'm sure that's just as relevant today, of art, that's just sold to market, to the masses. So, and then it's hard to recognize the real thing. The real thing comes along once in a while. Again, it's like great artists like Rush, few with the number of artists that we get out there every day, the top 40s, all the MTVs, YouTube, Spotify. It's a lot of information and music coming at us and art, and it's hard to really dive down into it. But
Ralph, you just made me think of something. It's hard to recognize the real thing comes along once. I feel like that's Rush. Like they stayed true to themselves. The real thing being them. Like most artists sell out, right? That just occurred to me.
Yeah, and I was thinking that too. I said the basic theme of this comes from their lyrics, their practice of how they ran their careers from 2112. They ran against the run of the mill. They decided, we're going to do this. You got the line from Natural Science, art as expression, not as market campaign. You get the spirit of radio, talking about the music and the business. So I thought, it's really about the integrity of the artists. And I think this was intended as a rebuke of the business side of it. And I think that's what, it came from.
So much poison and power can be attributed to that.
Right, yeah. Right, against the run of the mill, against the norms. I'm sorry, shapes and forms against the norms. All right, that reminds me of vital signs, always deviating from the norm. Swimming against the stream, and then life in two dimension is a mass production scheme. So we got to like again, I said the mass production of music that we're trying to get through. And then another part that the theme that came out is just the individual versus society. We get to like a teardrop in the ocean, a diamond in the waste. I felt that expressed like humanity is the ocean and we're all teardrops in that ocean, but we're all unique. And to go back to the book that I was describing is, we have to feed the masses, we have to help society, but we also have to remember that these are individuals. So I think that theme kind of claims part of it too, right?
If I could throw a little literature in here, I'm not a big John Dos Passos fan, and I admit it. So for all of the Dos Passos fans I'm about to offend, I think that Neil at this point in time was still coming kind of from the conservative side. He would gradually move away from that as time went on, okay? But the idea of critiquing the government and the expanse of power and overreach and this and that was straight ahead the conservative critique of the New Deal, okay? The vast majority of the country didn't feel that way. Roosevelt got reelected 4 times. So somebody must have liked it, but the conservatives, God bless them, did not. And that really was to some degree where Neil was aligned at that point. So I'm kind of wondering if that wasn't sort of an influence as well, the thing with government corruption, government overreach, that kind of thing. I think when you revisit where Neil is in the 1990s and early 2000s, he has moved towards what he jokingly called being a bleeding heart libertarian, and had kind of left Ayn Rand behind and left some of the really hard-edged conservative behind. And I'm wondering if he would write the song the same way, 20 years hence that he did at the time.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. I won't touch too much on this because I went into pretty big detail on the Something for Nothing Rush Fancast episode. So shout out to those guys. They were so gracious to let me talk about Grand Designs on their podcast. But I always thought this song was about the power to create, the power to innovate, kind of where Rush was at the time. They're really diving into synth heavy stuff, synth era. Breaking the surface tension is another example of that. It's like breaking through, the ceiling with this new idea of, or rather this new instrument or sound at the time with synths. And just going against the run of the mill. I think that's just what they were doing at the time. They were just, they lost fans in doing so. I think just this song, to me, this song is just about the power to create and the power to innovate.
Yeah. And then speaking of musically with the synths, for me, that kind of reminds me, that sequence part they have at the beginning and the outro kind of reminds me of cogs in the machine. I can hear like the gear twisting.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Kind of
a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Though I think that kind of keyboard sound permeates the whole album, but that's what I picture it.
Great outro too, right? Oh,
yeah,
great vocals.
Right.
The easiest thing in any Rush song to sing. All right.
Yeah. And then the drum outro, they usually they kind of fade it out, but this one lasts a little longer. Said Neil just banging away, and then they just had to relearn it once they wanted to do it live. That was interesting. Right?
So good.
Yeah.
Such an underrated track. All right, Donna, let's talk about Territories.
Well, I think we should. But why don't we have Neil talk about it? Because we have Neil's writings in the matter. And this was quoted in several places, and it has the virtue of being something he actually said, because there's an awful lot of fake quotes online, and they irritate me. They really do. Neil said, some people look at patriotism or nationalism as being the next best thing to loyalty to your family, but I don't buy it. And yeah, I really do believe that this is a period of time where Neil is questioning all kinds of isms, okay? And nationalism is something that really, really concerns him. Like, what does it mean to be, supporting our country? He writes about being a citizen of the world, okay? And he's concerned because, he starts right off with something that is very Neil. Neil, as we have said on more than one occasion, is a reader, and he reads everything. He's quite a polymath. He reads, scientific stuff. He reads medical stuff. He reads politics, sports. I mean, you name it, if it can be read, literature. I mean, he and I chatted about Shakespeare on more than one occasion, okay? If it can be read, he probably read it. Now, did he like it all? Was he fascinated by it all? He was fascinated by learning. Donna, what's your point? My point is that he makes a very interesting comment right at the beginning, okay? I see the middle kingdom between heaven and earth, like the Chinese call the country of their birth. Huh? Well, yeah, in about 1,000 to 2,000 before the Common Era, and my Mandarin is iffy at best. I come from a neighborhood where Cantonese is spoken, so I'm not even going to try to do Mandarin. But the rough translation of the name that we call China was originally the middle country or the middle kingdom. Those were the characters. It spelled out the middle country or the middle kingdom because the Chinese people believed that their country was at the center of the universe and that there were other countries, yeah, I suppose, but theirs was right at the center and it was the best. Now, that's a very typical view. Now, of course, years later, exploration, this and that, you find out that, well, maybe your country isn't at the center of the universe, but it's a rhetorical thing, like American exceptionalism, the belief that America was designed by God to lead the world. I'm not dissing God. I'm not dissing America. I'm saying that's a belief. And just about every country has something like that, where it's like, my country is the best, my country right or wrong. And Neil's saying, oi, that leads to wars. That leads to colonization. Like, what does the word territory mean? Okay, the word territory, which of course comes from the Latin, has the connotation of a jurisdiction that someone has control over, but that they don't have entirely the same rights or privileges. Like the United States had several territories. Alaska used to be a US territory, okay? Hawaii was a US territory. Canadians have the Northwest territories. I mean, and the word itself, animals are very territorial. Oh, there goes my dog protecting his territory. But we do the same thing. The border. Yeah, Donna, did you just advocate open borders? I didn't advocate a thing. But I'm saying that Neil really was interrogating the idea of borders and nations and saying that one was better than another. And there's a great line in here, okay? A great line about how we don't feed the people, but we feed the machines. This is us. We don't care about human beings, but boy, howdy, we get the best weapons. And if anybody tries to attack us, they'll be sorry because we're going to defend our territory. But what does that even mean, to defend your territory? At the end, he talks about the pride that divides when a colorful rag is unfurled. Now, the idea of the flag as a colorful rag sounds nasty. It isn't. As far back as 1906, there was a very famous song, and many of you know it, called You're a Grand Old Flag. It was a George M. Cohan march. You're a grand old flag. You're a high flying flag. Donna, don't sing. But the bottom line to that song is that the original version wasn't You're a grand old flag. And you can look this up. The original version was You're a grand old rag. The word rag used to be synonymous with a flag because it was a piece of cloth. But gradually, people got upset. And the writer of the song, George M. Cohan, said, okay, fine, wasn't trying to upset anyone. And he changed it to You're a grand old flag. So there you are. But the fact is, it's a piece of cloth. And we decide that we should fight wars over it. We do this with sports. I'm a big sports fan. But it's like, okay, fine. So I cheer for the Blue Jays or I cheer for the Red Sox. But look at soccer, where people get into fights over, well, my team, and they talk in here about, the drunken, let me make sure I've got the line right. The citizens, why can't I not think of the line? What's the line with the
you get the drunken and passionate pride of the citizens along for the ride.
Yeah. And what's good about having drunken pride? If all you got is going to the game and cheering for your team and having a bunch of beers and fighting with people, like Chumbawamba, I get knocked down, but I get up again. But I love the lyrics. But it was sung at games. It was sung at matches. Unfortunately, it got turned into, let's fight with the people from the other side. And Neil's saying, where's the nobility in that? Where is the pride that we feel in being human beings, in being citizens of the world? The whole world is an endless universe. Why don't we see it like that? Why do we just see it like our territory? It's a very powerful song about the human emotion to carve out something and say it's yours without thinking about who have you just excluded?
It's a very interesting take on, I think the power in this song is like nationalism, right? But I think it's portrayed in a negative light, like Grand Designs. The power there is a good thing. I think it's portrayed in a negative light here, right? I mean, that you get too much power over something that you think is yours, in this case, land, I guess, or a country. It becomes a negative thing, right? I mean, that's my thought.
And he does talk about, and I found my notes here. I've got so many notes here on this song. I could go on for days. Thank you, Tim, for finding the line that I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing a bunch of my notes here. The thing about the bosses get talking so tough, if that wasn't evil enough, we get the drunken and passionate pride of the citizens along for the ride. So the politicians talk tough, stir people up. Hey, let's go attack this and that. And meanwhile, the citizens don't realize that they're being lied to, that they're being taken for a ride. And Neil, as the ultimate skeptic, is saying, like, before you join in, whether inspired by alcohol or inspired by nationalism, you're being manipulated. You're being used. We're going to see echoes of this repeatedly in Rush songs, where his mind is not for rent by any god or government. Don't let the government or the gods or whoever take away your freedom of choice. You can carve out a territory, or you can be a citizen of the world. Why don't you want to be a citizen of the world? Why are you listening to people that are stirring you up and making you hate the other?
This song it kind of brings to mind John Lennon's
Imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
Absolutely.
like, it's why can't
Which
we just
unfortunately, a whole bunch of folks turned into, he hates God and he hates religion.
Yeah, right. No,
that wasn't what the song was about.
Let's just all get along. Ralph, you were going to say something?
Well, I was thinking, right, like you're talking about like territories, like, all right, my country's better than another country, but and then the United States, well, then my state is better than another state. Where, I'm from Jersey. South Jersey's better than North Jersey. And then
Well, everybody knows that.
well,
My county is better than your county.
Right.
And Massachusetts is better than all of you. So there you go.
I mean, now we're at the point now, like in the U.S., where it's like we're playing territories with the left and the right almost. We're not even, we can't even connect internally. It's more or less connect with other countries. I mean,
and we have parallel media where it's like, I listen to my sources, you listen to your sources.
Right, exactly.
And the sad part of it, and that, by the way, that was something that was profoundly disappointing to Neil. And Alex wasn't fond of it either. I never talked about it with Geddy, but I did talk about it with Alex and with Neil. The fact that at a Rush concert, people are righties, lefties, centrists, Jews, Gentiles, whatever. Nobody cares. They're all united by the music of Rush. Right. But now we've become so balkanized that it's like, the righties have their own channels and the lefties have their own channels and the libertarians have their own. And the fact that we used to have stuff in common is going by the wayside. And that's one of the reasons why I think Teritories is such a great song for today, because it reminds us, don't be territorial. Don't carve out your own little fiefdom, because the moment you start doing that, you think you're doing it out of pride. It's just making you exclude the other, demean the other, and not even bother to get to know the other. That person standing next to you at that Rush concert, they may have completely different views from you. But so what? What a great song that was. We're missing those moments. Like, I don't know what your politics are. I don't. And you know what? I don't give a rat's patootie.
Care. Mm-hmm.
Because what unites us is we're on this podcast or this webcast or whatever show we're on, just talking about something we love. We need more of that.
I will tell you a very quick funny story before we move on. Clockwork Angels tour, 2013, Saratoga Springs. I went with my mother, who not a huge Rush fan, but just liked to enjoy the music and have fun. In different circles, we keep holding our ground. In different circles, we keep spinning round and round. We decided to be clowns and start spinning, literally spinning. And this dad with a young kid next to us are looking at us like we got like three heads. And then they sing through it. Geddy sings through it again. And the little kid starts doing it with us. And it's like, here we are in unison to this song, which is like trying to bring people together. And it was just a really cool moment. So
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So just
and by
fun.
the way, the thing about spinning, I always took that also with a slight political meaning, because a lot of political communication is about spin. It's about making my side look good and making your side look ridiculous. And we keep doing this over and no matter how many times we are warned, no matter how many times we are told, we just are like repeating the same mistakes in generation after generation. And like I said, Neil found that profoundly disappointing. It's like, don't people learn,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, better people, better food, and better beer. So with that,
well, I'm a non-drinker, so that wouldn't inspire me.
The hidden bottle just came out. So Tim, there you go.
The hidden can.
Middletown Dreams.
Good segue. Great song, and a very relatable song. This is one of Neil's character studies, like Tom Sawyer, like the Analog Kid, or even the Camera Eye, where it's like an omnipresent observer. First verse, the office door closed early. The hidden bottle came out. The salesman turned to close the blinds, a little slow, now a little stout. So it starts out kind of negative. But he's still heading down those tracks any day now for sure. Another day as drab as today is more than a man can endure. Neil said that's about a writer named Sherwood Anderson, who I'm just reading from merely players here. Late in his life, he literally walked down the railroad tracks out of a small town and went to Chicago in the early 1900s to become a very important writer of his generation. There's two characters in the second verse. Boy walks with his friend in the fields of early May, and obviously it's about one who's just in the moment. We're just walking across this field to get home from school or whatever. The other one wants to be a rock star, a famous musician. So, he'd be climbing on that, just him and his guitar. Now, Neil says, second verse about the young boy wanting to run away and become a musician is a bit autobiographical, but it also reflects the backgrounds of most of the successful musicians I know, many of whom came from very unlikely backgrounds. I like this. Most of them had this dream that other people secretly smiled at or openly laughed at, and they just went out and made it happen. So I like the fact, and if you watch any show about most any successful musician, actor, anyone who went on to something, most of the time they do come from what would seem a very normal, a very unlikely background. Those are the people that they talk about in this song. And I love the melody. I think this song is just a great, great melody. It should have been a single, I think that, like many other songs, it talks about dreams. And I believe the power in this song is the power of dreams, and keeping that dream alive, like we talked about with Mission, exactly like we talked about with Mission. Also, there's a little bit of subdivisions here. There's a little bit of subdivisions and territories as well. But it's about a small town. And like Neil said, most states in the U.S. have a Middletown. So he just picked it. It could have been Springfield, I think it's just a fantastic melody, and I like the final. It's understood by every single person who would be elsewhere if they could. Where would you rather be? Anywhere but here. So far, so good, and life's not unpleasant in their little neighborhood. It's just another great song, and I never noticed before until Ralph brought it up. Yeah, there are a lot of M's in the words and the song titles on here. But yeah, it's one that snuck up on me. I didn't when I first get into Rush, Power Windows was among the last few albums that I got to listen to all the way through, and I remember that chorus just sticking with me for a long time after. Again, it's one of Neil's great case studies. He's he's a long, long way from talking about Greek gods and black holes. He's talking about real people, and he does it very, very well. Did it very, very well.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh, Lonely Attic Room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very reminiscent of that. Yeah, for sure. There was one other thing I was gonna say.
Kid can't even afford a shirt
or shoes. Yeah, he's got no shoes on either. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you check your vinyl, it's at the bottom. It says brought to you by the letter M on the inside liner.
A lot of their records, they got into a habit of doing that. Yeah.
I think so,
and
right.
then one, it's brought to you by like some Greek symbol or something.
Right.
I know what I was going to say. I heard this song on Sirius XM Deep Tracks a few weeks ago as I was preparing for this deep dive. So there you go. There's a deep track for you. This is probably one of the ultimate Rush deep cuts. So anything else you guys want to add before we move on? All right. Awesome tune. All right. So right to the heart of the matter. The song I'm doing is Emotion Detector, and this is the only song of 8 that was not played live from Power Windows. And every other song would be played live on the 1985-86 Power Windows tour. So this was the only song not played live ever. The song opens with synths layered with drums. Almost sounds like something kind of out of the military beat. The drums, what Neil's doing, and I think the opening synths really kind of set the tone for what's to come in the song, from a lyrical perspective and a musical perspective too. Perhaps all of the synths on this song is the reason this song was never played live. I don't know, but it certainly is a plausible theory. Perhaps it was something that was too difficult to trigger all these, primarily probably for Geddy, to do this live. Or maybe the song never really resonated with the band kind of as they expected. Alex License quoted in Guitar Player, April 1986, "There's always that one song you're terrified of doing. You think it's going to be really tough, and Marathon was the one. We wrote it and thought this song is going to be like pulling teeth once we get in the studio. Of course, we get into the studio and it's a breeze. It's a song like Emotion Detector, which we thought would be a breeze, was the killer. Uh, it was very, very difficult to get the mood right. I'm still not really sold on that song. It never ended up sounding the way I had hoped. Half of Emotion Detector was done in one pass. Actually, that whole song had a different solo that took quite a bit of work. We left it, went ahead with some other parts, lived with it for 4 or 5 days, and Neil didn't feel quite right about it. He didn't think it made the proper kind of statement to the song, so we re-examined it and gave it another whirl. That was tough. It's one thing to rewrite a rhythm guitar part. You've got stuff to lock onto, but it was so hard to divorce what had already been in my head as a solo for 3 months and come up with something that was totally different feel, but I was satisfied with the results. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this song is lyrically is one that's deals with the topic that's kind of revisited in later songs in the catalog, which we've discussed, being Open Secrets and Cold Fire, and perhaps even Halo Effect way later on. These romantic, vulnerable style songs were really the toughest for the band to write. But I think, Alex says he's satisfied with the results. I think they really knocked it out of the park. The song opens with lyrically, when we lift the covers from our feelings, we expose our insecure spots. Trust is just as rare as devotion. Forgive us our cynical thoughts. If we need too much attention, not content with being cool, we must throw ourselves wide open, start acting like a fool. If we need too much approval, then the cuts can seem too cruel. I think lifting the covers from our feelings, exposing our insecure spots, it reminds me of like a child sleeping. They need the blankets over them, right, to hide or shield themselves from the monsters or whatever. And taking that blanket off exposes them to the monsters, or in this case, it's making yourself vulnerable, right? You stop hiding things from in this case, seems like a partner, or it could be a friend. When you express your feelings, you're kind of showing your emotional weaknesses. And it's often tough to be open, kind of about your feelings, because who knows how people will react to that, right? And then if we need too much attention part, this reminds me of people in relationships where they feel like they're not receiving enough attention. And they throw fits to get the other person's attention. And oftentimes they make a complete fool of themselves, and they distance themselves even more. And then if we need too much approval, if approval is always needed from your significant other or a friend, and that approval is not there, it only further magnifies that. So I think that's what Neil's saying in the first verse. The chorus, right to the heart of the matter, I think that, or right to the beautiful part, I think getting to the heart of the matter and the beautiful part is getting to who you really are inside by making yourself vulnerable and putting your feelings out there, letting your true emotions kind of, shine through. And I think when you let those true emotions out, illusions of yourself, whether it be internally what you feel yourself or what your partner feels of you, those illusions are shattered. The second time through the chorus, it's totally purposeful that Geddy repeats illusions. Illusions are painful. He says it twice. I think at this point, you've let yourself out there, and now perhaps your partner has done the same thing. So that you've got, it becomes a two-way street at that point. Another verse here I wanted to touch on. It's true that love can change us, never quite enough. Sometimes we are too tender, sometimes we're too tough. If we get too much attention, it gets hard to overrule. So often fragile power turns to scorn and ridicule. And then one of my favorite Rush lines of all time, sometimes our big splashes are just ripples in the pool. So I think this whole verse, finding love allows you to open up, but we don't ever really fully open up, unless, of course, you're doing what Neil is proposing here, I guess, right? Your partner will never know everything about you, or every secret that you have. And sometimes we're too easy, and sometimes perhaps even too hard on ourselves. But, if too much attention is given in a relationship, I think that at that point it can become obsessive or needy, right? And it's hard to overrule or change that behavior. And then to my one of my favorite Rush lines ever, sometimes our big splashes are just ripples in the pool. I think, sometimes your big moments in life are minuscule to other people around you. Let's say you land a big job that you're super excited about or whatever, and your partner, your spouse or whatever, it's just like, okay, cool, nice job. You're happy for them, but it's not a huge moment in your life, but it's a huge moment for them. Or, I'm a golfer. Let's say I get a hole in one in golf. I come home and tell my wife, she couldn't care less. I'm thrilled about it. It's like that, right? I think that's kind of what is said there. And finally, what a killer guitar solo. Alex says he was satisfied with it. They took a lot of tweaking. I think this is one of the most underrated guitar solos that Alex ever wrote. I think it's a complete masterpiece. It's very forgotten about because this song is probably the least popular on the record, never being played live and such, but it really sets the atmospheric vibe to this song. It starts out with, the screeching at the beginning in the guitar solo, leading to kind of a more mellow sound with some layered synths underneath. It really gets those emotions going, and your feelings start to run high through that solo. And that's exactly how the song closes, with Geddy repeating "feelings run high" a couple times. Overall, fantastic deep cut. I kind of want to know your thoughts on it.
I'd be curious to hear the version with the other solo.
I believe it is in fact on YouTube. There are Power Windows demo tapes on YouTube. This is probably a good time to mention that. Power Windows. Apparently there's demo tapes. I don't know the story behind it. I've read that Alex's son perhaps got a hold of them and maybe gave it to a friend or something like that. I don't know how true that is. It could be complete bogus, but there are demo tapes. I'm almost certain it's Rush, and I'm almost certain they're legitimate. You never ever hear demo tapes get out with Rush, but they sound like watered down versions of these songs. And there is that solo on there, and the one that made the record is 100 times better. So
it'd be cool if they did like with Working Man when they came out with the Rock Band version with like an officially released. Maybe 40
years.
In 2025 for the 40th of Power Windows. Maybe we'll get it.
I'm hoping.
Can I also say that one of the critiques that people like to make about Neil, and usually it's made by people who don't know his work very well, is that, oh, he never writes any love songs, or he never writes any songs about love or romance. I think he was quite an observer of relationships and of the human condition. And I really do believe there are lines in a number of the songs, including on this album, that touch upon love and that touch upon relationships. And I just, again, I have to say, I think Neil in that regard is very misunderstood. His stuff is very subtle, but it's in there.
Yeah, I think just overall this song, the power of emotions, the power that you can have, that one person could potentially have in a relationship over the other. I mean, like, that's a thing, unfortunately. And I think that's really kind of what's portrayed in this song. I think it's the power of love in a way, which is huge. So, any closing thoughts that you all would like to bring up about Power Windows, other than it's awesome?
One of my personal.
Go ahead. While we're talking power, let's talk about the power of Rush for a second. I mean, as we are recording this, I'm about to have my 75th birthday on Valentine's Day. Okay. And as a cancer survivor, I'm very grateful to be here. But what I'm really grateful is the fact that here we are, years after these records came out, and there's still something new and fresh and interesting to discuss. We hope the fans are enjoying it as much as we are, because we're getting a tremendous kick out of it. But this isn't just like an ego thing for us. I hear feedback from the fans saying, hey, you gave me a new insight on one of the songs, or I never looked at it that way, or I haven't heard that song in ages. It's so fun and so gratifying to be able to see the power of Rush in people's lives even today.
The power of Rush, the power of music, but the power of our favorite band.
And I would say too, for anyone who hasn't, who has vinyl, dig out the Power Windows record, put it on, listen to it, but look at that album cover. There's a lot more in there than you maybe think there is, and you really do. I said it before in this show. You really do need the vinyl to get the whole story and the detail, and that that Hugh Syme put into it, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing, and the layers that come out, like Donna said, after years and years of, oh yeah, I know what the Power Windows album looks like, and I looked at it again. So, son of a gun, I never noticed that before, and I've had it for however many odd years. So, it's like they were going for the long game. They wanted music that would last, and they made sure that the artwork that went along with that music would last as well.
All right, folks. Well, let us know your thoughts on Power Windows. Continue the discussion in the comments on these 4 songs. And yes, going in reverse chronological order, we will be talking Grace Under Pressure next time. So we'll see you then. Take care, everybody.
Everybody.